Good evening, everyone. Welcome into the Nittany Lion Sports Report. Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus here, and welcome into the studio. Boy, I tell you what, it is a tough day if you're a Nittany Lion football fan, likely why you've turned to us here today, or maybe in spite of your better instincts, but we're going to talk through everything Penn State football, really give you a state of the program right now, because I don't know that anybody needs to know specific X's and O's as it pertains to Nebraska. Let's just talk through where things are, an 0-3 Penn State football team. And with that said, I'll bring in Tyler Gehlhaus. Now to do that, Tyler, the whiteboard I think says it all. A new low for Penn State, and we do go back to the drawing board. I think that's our role here tonight.
Yeah, I was absolutely astonished what I was seeing on Saturday afternoon. I mean, we kept talking that, tough loss to Indiana, outmatched against Ohio State. This is a great way to get the season back on track. We mentioned, all right, Big Ten championships pretty much out the door, college football playoff out the door, but there's still a lot to play for. We were saying, getting the team ready really for next year, an improvement, and seeing what you have, especially a quarterback with Sean Clifford. And by all accounts, Saturday was an absolute dumpster fire. That was as bad of a loss as I've seen going back to the 2015 season opener at Temple at Lincoln Financial Field. Some say it's worse. Some say it wasn't worse. But this was just brutal to watch, and it's the same thing over and over and over again, which is costing this Nittany Lions team. And it's poor defense, poor tackling, not making adjustments, and on it, and the turnovers. I mean, again, we keep seeing all these turnovers. Maryland was +3 against Penn State. You're not going to win many games. I don't care who you're playing when you can't win the turnover battle. And right now they're not forcing the turnovers, and they're just giving the ball away.
Yeah, giving the ball away. The defense is not able to handle chunk plays. We're seeing issues in zone coverage, communication breakdowns. We're seeing man-to-man just getting outmatched, which doesn't make a ton of sense with a Maryland team that is based on and filled with guys that James Franklin and his staff passed on in the recruiting process. It is extremely frustrating if you're a Nittany Lion fan. There's no doubt about it for all of those reasons.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned, Maryland scored 2 touchdowns on the same exact play. Raheem Jarrett just runs across, catches about a 5-yard pass and takes it for 50-plus yards each time. The main concern for me is when I look back at last year, Penn State went into Maryland Friday night. The game was hyped up. Maryland had no canceled classes, all that. And Penn State goes in there and wins 59-0. Okay, I don't understand how this turnaround happens. You can say, oh, well, we don't have Micah Parsons. Well, Penn State didn't have him in that last year's game either, as he was ejected in the first quarter for targeting. Sean Clifford looked like a totally different quarterback last year at Maryland than he did this year at home. Another year under his belt.
That was his best game. That was his best game by far. Penn State uniform
by far. Look, I get it. No Journey Brown, no Noah Cain. But there's no excuse for this. I mean, like you already said, Bob, Maryland's roster is filled with guys that didn't get Penn State offers because Penn State didn't view them as caliber players at Penn State caliber players. And there's obvious things to me that aren't clicking right now.
The reason we say that, by the way, on the Maryland side, and those that are following the recruiting closely will understand this, but the DMV, the D.C., Maryland, and Northern Virginia area is an absolute hotbed for talent. Think of the DeMathas and the McDonoughs of the world. P.J. Mustipher coming from McDonough High School, and there's so many others in that. Baltimore on the way down through Northern Virginia. Penn State has made that a real staking claim point. That is where they have made their money, in addition to the state of Pennsylvania, and they have expanded their presence throughout the country under James Franklin. That's a real feather in his cap, but really it's the DMV as well as Pennsylvania where Penn State has been extremely successful recruiting. We'll talk a little bit about how that's not been successful for the 2021 class. They've risen back up in the 2022 class. But again, that's what we're talking about when it comes to Maryland recruiting. They're looking to take the players that Penn State has been able to get out of their backyard. And that's why it's been so successful, huge for them to win this football game.
And I mean, you could see that they were playing with a chip on their shoulder. I mean, this is really the third straight game, and it's obviously the only third game of the season that Penn State, there's no emotion out there. It looks like there's a lack of leadership. I mean, every time they're showing the sideline, there's never you got to bring your own excitement to this kind of game with no fans, and the other teams that they're playing are doing it, and I just haven't seen it with Penn State. I think they're shooting themselves in the foot too many times early on, going for it on 4th and goal, throwing a slot fade instead of just taking the points, and now you're really playing catch up. They kind of did the same thing against Ohio State. But there's something off right now, and I'm not sure if it's leadership, if it's just 2020 in general. The coaching staff, I don't know, but it's something pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, well, and you made the point, Tyler, about effort, right? And almost like the team didn't have emotion. Begs the question, did they give up? And that, for me, is an impossible question to answer. I don't know whether the players gave up. But what I can tell you is I understand how folks may be coming to that conclusion, whether warranted or unwarranted. The play out there on the field, the talent gap that did not show, the lack of discipline, and what would appear to some to be a lack of heart. And you know what? Could you blame these players if they did lack a little bit of the edge or intensity that they would bring into any other game? Your season is over, Tyler. You mentioned this earlier in the show. The college football playoff dream is over. You lost a game you should not have to Indiana. In some ways, the numbers showed that you were embarrassed against Ohio State, though the score may show it to be a little bit closer. And it's a COVID season. You had Micah Parsons already opt out. Could some of the other guys, Jason Oweh, et cetera, choose to opt out from here? And you just don't know the answers to these questions. So when folks say that they didn't play with heart, you're not going to get a full, wholehearted agreement on my part. But what I will say, Tyler, is I understand why folks might think that this team was lacking a little bit of heart, because you're searching for an explanation for what happened on the field. That was a total embarrassment for the team and the program against Maryland on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think Penn State feeds a lot off the emotion inside of the stadium, Beaver Stadium, obviously. Even on the road, I mean, you can feed off the other team's fans booing you. I mean, emotion and the fans have a lot to do with these games, and I think we're seeing it right now for sure. I'm trying to find it here, but Jahan Dotson made a comment after the game, which
we're not operating as one was essentially
right, and I thought it was. He said there's some distractions going on in the locker room. Take that for what it is, but he's the same guy that James Franklin a couple weeks ago said Jahan Dotson's only said 23 words, obviously. Being a little facetious, since he's been on campus, this being his 3rd year, and you have a quiet guy coming out and saying that kind of thing. By the way, he's obviously, I think, playing the best football by far on Penn State right now, Jahan Dotson. But it just begs the question, what exactly is going on? And I want to talk about this for a little bit too. We talk about not being a normal year for the players. It's not a normal year either for the coaches. James Franklin's family, wife, and girls have been living in their vacation home in Florida ever since this really started. So, I mean, I don't know if he's there mentally either. I mean, there's just a lot of – now, look, everybody's playing really in the same circumstances here, but it just doesn't seem normal at all the way that James Franklin has run the program the last couple years. Energy, and there's just no energy right now.
That's true. And I know we're going to get to another interesting and real inflection point of the show here. So I'll pause now, and you're talking about not bringing the energy. I promise we will bring the energy today, especially later in the show, with our guest picker. Backed by popular demand, Dan Green he's a chef in Philadelphia. He does a wonderful job, and he has really an amazing story which led him to be a sous chef at a really high-end restaurant in Philadelphia. So excited to have him on in just a short while. But let's now pivot, though, to a big part of what we're going to talk about here today, Tyler, and that is the state of the program, specifically that of the coaching staff. Players turn over every 3 to 5 years. Coaches, the hope is that they don't turn over in 3 to 5 years. But let's talk about where the program is as a whole. I'm teeing you up to talk about coaching. We can talk about anything. We can talk about player personnel. We can talk about recruiting. But let's take a top-down approach. I know you have some thoughts, and I feel like after 0-3, we would normally take this time now to talk a little bit about Scott Frost's program at Nebraska. I just don't know if that's needed or asked for from our audience here tonight.
Yeah, so the state of the program to me, at the beginning of the season, after the Cotton Bowl, 2020 was one, actually for a couple of years that people had circled on their calendars. When you look at the roster and the setup of your roster, the roster breakdown, you would have had Freiermuth and Parsons as juniors, highly touted NFL guys, especially after the Cotton Bowl. People, fans are like this, and the schedule set up pretty nice, Ohio State at home. And honestly, it's done a total reverse course. And I don't even know where this program stands right now. I wouldn't be surprised if James Franklin walks away at the end of the season. I get the sense, and I don't know for sure, but I just get the sense that he's like kind of getting burnt out. His recruiting isn't there right now in the 2021 class. It's been talked about plenty of times that, this was a year that he had circled as well, and everything has just fallen apart. It doesn't seem like he has the locker room right now, based on the comments by Jahan Dotson, the leadership that we're seeing out there on the field. All that being said, it's been a crazy year, and I don't know how they're going to react to being 0-3. Do the players not really? There was an article today that some of the teams that are already eliminated technically from the playoffs are they going to care and do the right thing? I don't know, but I just get the sense that.
I know what tweet you're talking about, and obviously we're talking about pure speculation here.
What's his name? Bud Elliott? Is it Bud Elliott?
Yeah. That's speculation. But what do you mean, right? When you say not doing the right things,
because
he's specifically talking about
what I mean by that
COVID.
is right. And it when this first broke out, and Penn State knew that we're going to do a season starting October or whatever it was. He seemed like that Penn State had they followed. Apparently, I mean, they really haven't had any cases reported with the football program that we've been aware of. A false negative or false positive, I should say. But he's put so much time and effort into making sure that, obviously his players stay safe. And now there's worries out there that, teams that are eliminated, their players still going to care to not go out and have fun. And then is there going to be a trickle-down effect? I mean, we're seeing it a little bit right now, not to totally change the subject off the coaching, but LSU and Alabama's now in danger. LSU's like 2-4, 2-5, because now they have a spike. So it's something to watch. I'm not saying that they're going to get a spike, but how is a team going to react to being 0-3? Are they still going to do the right thing with COVID aspects, I should say, on that end?
Yep. And by the way, while we're already off track, let's just say this. Derek Davis, who coming out of the state of Pennsylvania, folks were very excited to hear him commit. He seemed to be a good bet to commit to Penn State, then took a couple late visits, one of which was LSU, commits over the weekend, and all of a sudden, from bad to worse for this Penn State program.
And you're just scratching the surface with that one, because he's been to Penn State more than 10 times. Actually was the water boy for Terry Smith, Penn State's cornerbacks coach, when he was coaching at Gateway High. So this one stings. I mean, it's top talent in the state again, leaving the state. Like I said, he's been to Penn State 10 times. Went to LSU once 2 weeks ago, the day they actually lost to Auburn on the road.
Yeah.
I guess that was enough for him to see that he wanted to go to LSU. And, he's off to LSU, and Penn State, their recruiting in 2021 has been disastrous. Look, there's been a lot of coaching changes, and they haven't been able to get guys on campus, obviously, for visits because of coronavirus, and the NCAA's put a hold on all that. But it's just been a snake-bitten year, really, for Penn State. And that's what I keep coming back to with Franklin is I don't know how many more hits he can take. And I know he's a strong individual, but just mentally, how many more hits can he take at Penn State before he goes, you know what, I got to go somewhere else?
Interesting. Let's get into that. So where would he go? When you say walk away, is he going to walk away from his contract? Is he going to go somewhere else? Is that school going to pay the buyout? What do you mean?
I'm not exactly sure on his contract, how that's all worked out. I know he's getting paid a lot of money. I know he still has a couple more years left on that contract. We talked about it last week, and I still believe it's true. I don't think Penn State would ever fire James Franklin, at least not this year. There's too much money on his contract, and a lot of people are getting that mulligan year because of the COVID year. If he leaves after this year, I believe it will be on his own. And I think the more this season goes downhill, the more I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. I think now in terms of where would he go, I don't know if he would, USC. I don't know if the Tennessee job opens. Auburn, I don't know if that opens. Texas, but
again, that school would need to then pay the buyout.
So at the same time, looking at it, I don't know if he's going to be as attractive after a season that Penn State is having and what could, ultimately be a 2-3 win season at the end of the day. I mean, pure speculation there, but it's just, I don't know. A lot of things are kind of just, I just wouldn't be surprised if he, at the end of the day, or even like took a year off. I don't even know. I mean, that's as crazy as that sounds. I think he's starting to realize that his window at Penn State may have passed. And that could be the hard reality here because, 2017 really should have been the year when we look back at it and they blew the game at Ohio State, Saquon Barkley, Trace McSorley. That team was loaded. And if they don't choke that game, they get to the playoff pretty much. They still have to win the Big Ten championship. They obviously lost Michigan State the week after, but I just don't know how many more body blows he can take. And I know you're a big fan of him. I like what he can do on the trail. I'm obviously not that impressed with 2021, but I've just seen some things that have made me scratch my head. And a lot of it is, and I know he's a good leader, but I'm not seeing the leadership on game days and the game management and some of the decisions that are being made I just don't agree with. And there's a lot of new assistant coaches. I don't even know what I think about the assistant coaches yet.
Kirk Shiraka has not lived up to the hype yet. Now, I do think you give him a year, especially a year like this, to figure it out. I do think you give him a chance to go to the portal next year and try to find a quarterback if that's indeed the way they go.
I think they have to go to the portal, which is,
But I'm saying he came in just before the bowl last year.
He did. There was no spring season.
Yeah, I think you have to give him time.
I do too, but again, if Franklin walks after season, again, pure speculation. There's nothing to it yet. That likely means the staff is out too.
Right. Well, okay, so maybe let's start there because I don't see that happening. I don't see him just walking without another job.
Another job could. I don't think he would do the year off either. But I think if the right opportunity came up, albeit just say Tennessee, Auburn.
Yep. And listen, not that these football programs across the country would not shell out that. I'm not saying that. We just have to understand. Penn State sent a letter out saying they're losing almost $1 million, $800,000 this year, and so that's Penn State with the Big Ten television contract, with the high number of boosters and donors that they have. That's Penn State that has, you would think, the financial wherewithal to withstand something like that, and whether real or manufactured, they are painting a picture that they are in trouble financially. So you would have to imagine, I know that Texas and Auburn is putting some fans in the stands, so there's a delta there. I would have to imagine that it's very difficult for one of those schools to pay a multi-million-dollar buyout just to get James Franklin on campus, then to potentially make him the highest paid head coach or one of them in college football in a year where he's going to lose 4 or 5 games in a 9-game season. I just struggle to see that happening. And then I think that it's a fair take from you because you have long been on that block. I think there's a faction of Penn State fans that went from about here to about here after that game, and I understand why they're frustrated, but to me it does seem like perhaps just a little bit early, and maybe short-sighted on some to have that conversation right now. Not you, like I said. I think you've been on that block for long enough. I just don't think that would be the right move right now. I think it would be a quick trigger, and I think it comes back to what is Penn State, right? Like, what is the coach that you're trying to bring in? Is it a program that gets to the college football playoff 2 out of every 5 years? Is it a team that wins 10 games 3 or 4 out of 5 years? Because that's what they are now, by the way. Or if that's not good enough, what is good enough? Or do we have enough reason to believe that they cannot and will not get back to that point? And I would say no to that answer. I mean, this is a blemish, and I think firing him after this season, in a crazy season that it is, the first season where he hasn't won 9 games in 4 years, would be a little much.
I think you bring up a great point with the money and contract part of it, because money does talk at the end of the day. I would actually really like to give him another shot, because this is really his worst performance. But the problem I have with it is there's still a lot of talent on the team, and it just doesn't seem like anything is clicking anywhere. And when we hear about it all the time, so-and-so, he's looking really good. He's climbing up draft boards. And then we watch the game, and he's okay. And I just don't know if they're getting the most out of their guys right now.
I can understand that.
And you have to get the most out of your guys with any team. But especially when you're going up against Ohio State and they recruit better than you every year pretty much, you have to get more out of your lower rated recruits, and you got to get even more out of your star players, and this year they're just not getting it really from anybody. And it starts with the quarterback, it ends with the quarterback. It really does. But I'm interested too. I thought that some of these assistant coaches should certainly be on the hot seat.
I get that. I think you at least reevaluate what's going on.
I wouldn't anticipate anything happening mid-season by any stretch.
No, I don't know. This isn't just to take the contra point here, but the call's reversed at Indiana. You win the game by 1. You're 1-0, and you think, well, dusting off the cobwebs. The first game they're playing is on October 24th, and Indiana has proven to be quite a capable team. I would say they're playing significantly better than they did on October 24th. I don't think Indiana played well that day, but let's just reverse the situation. They win that game. You're still 10-point dogs, maybe up to 13 or 14 against Ohio State. You lose that game by 13. I'm sorry. If the question is you need a coach that's going to beat Ohio State right now or every year, then sure, James Franklin might not be that guy, but I don't think there is a guy that can do that. So that's what it is. And then I don't think Penn State plays the way they did on Saturday against Maryland. If those two things happen, if they're 1-1 going into that game, I don't think they play that way against Maryland. Maybe that is my way of saying that I don't think the team was ready to play. Potentially, they did not have the heart. Yeah, I don't remember many games like that in the past. This might be the first game where you can realistically say that you felt as if Penn State did not care or the players were not ready to play, and even then I can't say that with certainty. So, let's see what happens the rest of the season. The players not being ready to play, yes, that's on the coach, but also then again, you can also understand, and I think you'll see more of that over the course of this year.
Right.
I'm kind of talking in circles, Tyler, but to me, it's just that game is not a reflection of James Franklin's tenure or even the recent trend of his tenure. That was just, to me, a complete anomaly, and if they get smoked 6 more times before the end of the year, then we'll have that conversation.
Well,
but this seems too early to me.
Yeah, but, it unfortunately, this is becoming the current theme with who Sean Clifford apparently is as a quarterback.
That's fine.
Right.
I'll have that conversation all day long about getting a younger guy in there, getting reps. That conversation I will absolutely entertain and be a part of. Not that I won't entertain the Franklin one, but I think it's different.
I know, like, in a season like this, when it's bring your own energy, and you're literally, you worked all that off season, went through all the, leaps and bounds and, testing and COVID testing and all that, and your season starts like this, I'm really interested. I was already interested before Maryland to see how they responded, and I saw how they responded. But moving forward, now each week, I'm actually more interested to see how they respond emotionally, mentally, and see what kind of team, what kind of guys this team's made up of.
Sure.
From coaching down, because Now you're playing not to be last place in your own division.
Sure.
Where at the beginning of the year you were playing to be first in your division. So,
well, what's interesting then, if we do transition just a little bit to Nebraska, not to get into the X's and O's of it, but you're also talking about a program whose fan base is either rationally or irrationally really upset at Scott Frost, and a program that, much more so than Penn State, I believe has unrealistic expectations of what they should be on an annual basis. This is a program under under Tom Osborne, if we're going to go back that far, that won when there were not scholarship limitations and roster restrictions, and they took 119 players because they didn't want their rivals, in Oklahoma to get the same players that they did. Oh, by the way, the JUCO scene used to be far superior in Nebraska than it is now. That's moved to Kansas and some of the other areas in the Midwest of the country. And so Nebraska is not what it was in the past, and I think there's an unrealistic expectation amongst its fan base when they brought Scott Frost home that it was going to be an immediate turnaround, and clearly that's not been the case. Nebraska fans are also thinking that now is the time to move on, probably more vehemently than the Penn State fans. And so this is a game between two very struggling programs with coaches that may or may not be on the fritz with their relative athletic administrations, but are certainly with the fans.
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought this game, both teams are going for their first win. One of those teams is going to get their first win. The other team is going to take another loss, and there's going to be more coaching talk at that school.
Yeah.
And I would Scott Frost has only been there, what is this, his third year?
Yeah, that's right.
It's still pretty early. I mean, like I said earlier, this almost feels like a mulligan year for everybody. It's hard to really grade, individuals, but it's very. I mean, Penn State going into this game, Nebraska's not a good team. They did play Ohio State pretty well, at least for a
period
half,
of time.
right? But I don't even know what to expect really in this game at all from either team.
Yeah.
I mean, emotionally, on the field, physically,
Identity
have no
searching.
idea what to expect.
It's an identity crisis, I think, for both teams. For Penn State, the call to action is very simple. Do you have the heart, right? So let's prove one way or the other that last week was an anomaly and show the heart. Or have you mailed it in on the season? And if you see the same performance that you did against Maryland, you may certainly assume that this team has mailed it in for the season.
And that would be extremely disappointing to mail it in, because it's oftentimes a reflection on leadership, the coaching, the culture, the locker room. I mean, how many times do you hear, the coach, he lost the locker room?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you just don't want to see that. Even if they end up going 4-5, but they compete, they play hard. You want to keep the pieces that you've recruited and the solid foundation that you appeared to have before the season intact. You don't really want to blow it all up.
Sure.
But that could certainly happen, and it's already on its way to happening after Saturday, but there's plenty of time to stop it from happening. But you got to take care of business on Saturday.
Not that anybody in the Penn State community or you or I care what the national scene or the national narrative is, but let's call it what it is. If Penn State were to move on from James Franklin, you would be firing a coach who came in at the end of one of the worst sanctions imposed by the NCAA in the history of college football or any sport. He came in with 65 scholarships, no offensive line. Bill O'Brien did a good enough job, certainly, but wasn't the world's greatest recruiter, and under those sanctions it was difficult. He came in with a ton of pressure on his back and with people calling for his job, won a game against Minnesota where they were down 10 at halftime, and then the very next week went and beat Ohio State in a crazy game, and they have been ranked ever since in the top 25, most of those times in the top 10 and top 15. And now this year, in the COVID year, with your best defensive or otherwise player, fringe Heisman contender Micah Parsons, opting out, and an unproven quarterback, a brand new offensive coordinator without a spring to work through or much time to evaluate, transfer portal, etc. Had a tough start, is 0-3, and they dropped out of the poll for the first time in over 4 years. If Penn State were to fire that coach after that point, the national narrative would be, why would you want to go coach at Penn State?
Sure, I still don't think he'd be fired, though.
Okay.
But I think it would be more of a parting ways. I don't think he would be fired at least this year. If this year is terrible and next year's no better, then we could probably have that discussion.
Sure.
I don't think he's going to be fired this year, and he's probably still coming back for next year. I just wouldn't be surprised if he had enough and parted ways. But that's totally pure speculation on my end. But one thing you bring up a good point about winning the Big Ten in 2016, coming off sanctions, scholarships, etc. How was James Franklin able, and I know that the talent on that team, he had a generational player in Barkley at running back, which helped a lot. But how was he able to win with a team that was, coming off the sanctions like that? And now we see, at least with this year, now going backwards.
Yeah, so why weren't they able to win the Big Ten in each of the last few years? I think Ohio State has gotten progressively better. I think they've given Ryan Day a much more of a hand in the day-to-day planning, and now obviously he's the head coach, and I think he's the best head coach in college football. So that's the first part. I think the right set of breaks came through. Ohio State got the fortune of a very generous call against Michigan, and Penn State got in on a tiebreaker. So that was fortunate. I don't think that Ohio State team was nearly as good as the Ohio State teams that you see on the field right now. So that's the first thing. That's why they haven't won the East, in my opinion. Second, in terms of what's happening right now, I think Trace McSorley and Saquon Barkley were a huge part of the culture of this program that was built, and they have not recruited the quarterback position nearly well enough. They've been close. Justin Fields committed.
Yeah.
We talk about the new guy going to Ohio State next year. We've talked about him a couple times. Kyle McCord. They've been in the mix for some other guys that have gone to SEC country or Big 12 country as well. But they have not recruited that position well enough. You could argue that some of the player development hasn't quite been as good either, right? Like Jason Owe is going to go in the first round, and he has not shown out the way you would expect.
No.
Obviously, Yetur Gross-Matos is a stud, but you felt like when he went up against equal or better talent, he was muted.
Right. It's like almost like against inferior opponents they can star. But actually, Yetur Gross-Matos did play very well in that Ohio State game.
He did.
Now that I recall.
He did. You're right.
And I wasn't necessarily pointing him out. Just in general, it seems like a lot of the stars, quote-unquote stars, disappear in bigger games.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like, at least.
Yeah. So, and again, it's tough in college football because your big games, quote-unquote, are Ohio State, who just has a real depth of talent that even if, Micah Parsons or Yetur Gross-Matos or Shaka Toney is as good or could play on their defensive line or in their linebacking core, which all of them, I believe, could. Yeah, it's the fact that the guy standing next to you isn't as good as the guy that was standing next to Chase Young.
Right.
And so they can allocate and deploy more resources against you. In addition, beyond Ohio State, Michigan State, there are so few games that we assign that value to, and it's often against the team that may have better talent than you than Ohio State. In Ohio State, for example. I don't know. I think we might be overblowing that slightly as it comes to, hey, are we developing? Is Penn State developing the players that they should? I just think they lag behind an Ohio State program that has increased the delta across the Big Ten. I think the top 4 programs in college football have increased the delta relative to the normal, or normal top 25 program now than they have in the past. And that's what I see happening right now. Now, I don't know if Penn State would be able to bring in a coach to erase that delta or not. I don't know if they have the resources to do it or if they'd find the right coach. But I think that James Franklin puts them in the conversation every year. Yes, mulligan year is one way to describe it for results as well as a 2021 recruiting class. if this is it and the 2022 class comes in guns a-blazing, and they might be able to find a quarterback and maybe somebody else in the transfer portal for next year. Noah Cain comes back for next year and is the starting running back. We may look at this as a blip, as the COVID year, and Penn State back to where it should be, which is a 9 or 10 win team, which in the right set of circumstances may be able to win the East, but that's contingent upon Ohio State coming back to earth.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. We talk about I want to talk about the quarterback a little bit because we talked about the recruiting over the years. I just think that Penn State hasn't. I know they haven't recruited the position well enough because, in my opinion, Will Levis should have seen time on Saturday.
To do what?
At some point, well, for one,
to throw the ball or
well,
to do that run option crap.
Well, I mean, anything's better than a 25 quarterback rating, which
I hear
Clifford
you.
was, and Clifford hasn't played well at all this year, despite a few plays to really not give Levis a shot. The only time Levis had a shot was the Wildcat debacle at Indiana week 1, if you want to call it a Wildcat, whatever. But why not? That's my thing. Is I know that he's probably not the passer, but if we're going to be running Clifford anyway, like a running back, why not throw Levis in there, who's a better runner? Just maybe he can create a spark. I mean, he created a spark last year at Ohio State.
He did. There's no doubt about that.
I would just say, see what he can do. That's all. And behind him, you have Taquan Roberson, who is still a couple years off, in my opinion, of ever maybe playing meaningful ball there. And then Micah Bowens. I mean, it's just really nothing against these guys. It's just not a great room when you look at other rooms and how they recruit quarterbacks around the country. And we talked about it last week. If you look at the top teams, it really comes down to quarterback play.
The best example is Ohio State.
Well, I mean,
they have 3 gonna be with
right.
the rules this year as a bye year. In theory, 3 true freshmen that were all 5-star studs to choose from next year.
And I mean, and look at what DJU just did with Clemson. They lost to Notre Dame, but you take Lawrence out and you replace him with that guy.
Yeah,
I mean he starts on every team this year except Alabama, maybe.
I would play him over Mac Jones.
Alabama, Clemson.
I know Mac Jones is a Heisman favorite,
right.
but I don't see it.
And probably Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Anywhere else, he's a starter.
Yep.
I mean that's how good he is. I mean he would start for Notre Dame.
Yeah. By the way, did Brian Bressie look good to you on Saturday night?
He did look very good.
I mean, not that Penn State was ever right on the doorstep or anything, but they were strongly in the mix.
They led for a while.
They were strongly in that mix.
And that's another thing that is kind of really starting to, in my opinion, disappoint Franklin is closing on these guys.
So 2 ways to look at that, right? The first is exactly what you said, that he is not a closer. The other way to think about it is that, damn, this program is identifying these kids at a very young age.
Justin Fields, and then he blows up.
And then they blow up.
That's a tough one because
that's going to happen.
He's from the Atlanta area, decommitted to go to Georgia, and obviously left there. But
given the 2 options,
Bressie was always a top guy, and he was from Maryland. Right. His girlfriend apparently is the same year as him and decided to go to Clemson as well. I'm sure that had something to do with it, but I can't blame a kid for wanting to go play football at Clemson.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's not like he went to Virginia Tech or something where you're like, why would he? You know what I mean? So,
right.
But that dude is a monster.
He is a monster.
And they've missed on a lot of these guys. I mean, we don't know what Julian Fleming's going to be yet at Ohio State. Another literally in the backyard from
that was a big mess.
Area.
That one looked like it could have gone Penn State's way for a long time, and then he flipped.
And then this year, it's Nolan Rucci going to Wisconsin to play with his brother from PA. Derek Davis, you just said, going to LSU. Marvin Harrison Jr., Ohio State. Kyle McCord, Ohio State. 2 St. Joe's prep kids. I mean, dominate the state was so long ago, and it was his slogan when James Franklin came to Penn State, but it's been really anything but that recently. And I don't even really care.
Their top PA recruit now, I believe, is Lonnie White out of Malvern Prep.
And he'll eventually be top 10 in the state. I mean, he's very, very good. But
he's an athlete.
Right.
He's an athlete, and I think he'll come in a little raw, but he's a tremendous athlete, calling both his football and basketball games. The kid just pops off the page at you.
And hopefully he makes it to Penn State football before he, because there's a chance that he gets signed by an MLB team, signed and drafted by an
right.
NFL,
Well, that's true
MLB team, because he's a phenomenal baseball player. But I don't know. It's almost like people are looking for a reason not to go there. I mean, back to Derek Davis, he visited 10 times. Pretty much, Terry Smith is like a second father to him almost. And then to go to LSU once, he's never even met the coaches at LSU face to face.
Yeah.
And gave himself a tour of the campus, and he picks them over Penn State. I mean,
I'm sure there's more to come there. We'll have to dig in a little bit.
LSU's put guys in the NFL, especially defensive backs. But, LSU's going to be getting hit pretty hard with some scholarship sanctions coming up. And I don't think LSU, what we saw last year, as great of a run that was, that wasn't the new norm for LSU. And I don't think this year is the new norm for them either. But they're a 9 to 10 win football team every year, which is fine. But they're not going to be 15-0 year in and year out like last year either.
Right. How's that state of the program? You cleansed? You feel good?
It's honestly it's wait and see now every week. I'm watching for different things. I want to continue to see younger guys. Parker Washington played well this week. The wide receiver position, all of a sudden, we talked about it as strength, and the O-line, not where we thought they'd be. The quarterback, nowhere near where we hoped he would be, and the running back situation is what it is with the two top guys out. I would still like to see them run the two freshmen a little bit more. But overall, I don't think anybody's really happy. But given the circumstances of this year and this season, it's been a little easier to brush off.
It's a good discussion, Tyler. I enjoyed it. Perhaps therapeutic for some. But that's where we see things right now. A discussion on the coaching, a discussion on the quarterback for sure, a discussion on recruiting. And all that adds up to where the program is right now. 0-3, heading into a winless Nebraska team that feels similarly, maybe even with a bit more vitriol from a fan base perspective against their coach. My mantra or my message is to let's give it the season at least. And I'm speaking more to the narrative from a Penn State fan's perspective. There is a faction out there, and it's growing, saying fire Franklin. It's some of the same things that we've heard. Not a great X's and O's guy, doesn't have his guys ready to play. This seems to be a special situation. That Maryland game was, in my estimation, the low point of the Penn State football program from a football standpoint since James Franklin took over. And let's just see if that continues. Perhaps that is a blip, but either way, let's think about what we said before. Took the program over with sanctions, got them to a Big Ten championship game, got them into the rankings as of 2016. They've been in every top 25 ranking since then. They've been in the mix, 9, 10 win seasons, opportunities to beat Ohio State. They've given Ohio State the toughest games that Ohio State has had over the last 3 years, period. To fire that guy in a COVID year, new offensive coordinator, your best player opts out, your second best player opted out, then decided to come back in a brand new system that didn't highlight the tight end in years past. It's a lot that happened in this year for Penn State. That's the same for everybody. But you keep your coach and you let him see this through, and you give him an opportunity to get the program where it needs to be, where it can be. That's where I am on it. That's what I see with James Franklin. That's the state of the program. Things are not great right now, but they are not unalterable. And I feel like that has to be the thought process going forward. We're going to bring the energy in our next segment. Dan Green is here, our guest picker for the evening. We're going to learn about being a chef in Philadelphia and everything that goes along with that in today's day and age. We'll be right back here on the Nittany Lion Sports Report with that, as well as our picks for this week.
What does your character look like? Does it bounce back after each setback? Does it stand out by standing up? Does it make good on good intentions? Character is invisible until it's not. Only through action will the world know what it's made of, what you're made of. Find out how you can strengthen the character of your community alongside empowered veterans and families of the fallen at travismanion.org.
Welcome back inside the Nittany Lion Sports Report. Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus here, and now time for our guest picker. Without further ado, and back by popular demand, it's Dan Green.
Come on.
Dan Green, professional chef at A Kitchen in Philadelphia. Welcome back to the show. You brought the energy last time. I know you're going to do the same thing here today.
Yeah, why not? Let's do it.
Let's do it.
It's the daily life. You know what I'm saying?
Not really, but that's what we're going to ask you about. And I'm also going to move the mic a little bit here for you. But tell me a little bit about being a chef. We learned a little bit about it last year, your road to get here. But for the folks that may not have watched the last time, how does someone like you make your way into the field of cooking in a great food city like downtown Philadelphia?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, like I said last time, actually, I got into cooking as more of like a therapeutic method of, I'll say, coping with what I was originally doing out of college, which was social work and working with the homeless in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So I actually started cooking by myself after work to sort of like, cope with the hardships of having to go through certain things. And, I was maybe somewhat burnt out at that point in my career as a social worker. So cooking was like really there for me when I needed it. And at a certain point, I decided that why am I using cooking as just a method of therapy when I should just be doing it as a career? So that made the switch pretty easy for me. And I decided to move back to Philadelphia because it was easier to have my family and friends around in this big switch, this big life event. So I moved back to Philly and got a job at a restaurant in Rittenhouse Square. It's called A Kitchen. And here I am. Been there for just a shade over 2.5 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's been pretty fun. I've learned a lot along the way.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And now we're in a COVID world, obviously, here. What's that look like?
Yeah, it's good. It's I think we've done a pretty good job of adjusting. We're simplifying the plates, which is one large adjustment. I mean, we kind of have like a skeleton crew, we call it. So when we first came back, it was just the chef, and then I was the first person to come back, sort of just like the right-hand person to him, as just helping out, get takeout food out to the people that. So a lot of our guests were people that were staying in the hotel long term, or people in Rittenhouse Square that just live in those big high rises. And then slowly but surely we've climbed back and brought back a few more people, and now we're, at least during the summer, we were ripping. We had a lot of people there. We had a lot of guests, so that was good. And now we're kind of going back into our shell and we're gonna shift into a more takeout menu again. So it's been up and down. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been crazy, but it's been fun, and I've definitely learned a lot from being just, at one point it was just me and Eli is the chef there. It's just me and him one-on-one all day. So it's kind of like, in my eyes, it was a crash course of working with like an amazing chef by yourself. You have no option but to learn.
That's really cool.
So much every day. So yeah, it was really good.
Dan Green is here. He's our guest picker tonight on the Nittany Lion Sports Report. As mentioned, a chef, and he said it, right-hand man to the head chef at one of the best restaurants in Philadelphia, A Kitchen in Rittenhouse Square. Check it out and go visit. Whether you are comfortable in person or takeout, we recommend supporting these guys and all of our guests here in whatever they may do. And it's serving out some delicious food.
Yes.
And stepping aside from that slightly, I want to talk a little bit about the food scene in general. So New York, Chicago, LA, right? These are cities known for their food. Philadelphia is right there with it. And always that city that's, a little bit gritty and doesn't love being in between DC and New York and being thought of any less. I mean, Philly has an amazing food scene as far as I'm concerned. How would you define Philadelphia as it pertains to the greater culinary scene?
Well, I think the first thing that I noticed when I got to Philadelphia, and I won't say that it's not a competitive city in the food scene. I think everyone's paying attention to what other people are doing, whether it's through social media or just eating at other restaurants, your competitors in the city. But I will say that it seems like there's an absurd amount of social ties amongst the chefs. And this is sort of on the outside looking in as I kind of stepped into the role as like a sous chef at a kitchen. Even before I could see that there were several chefs that would come into a kitchen and not only eat there, almost like with a wandering eye, like you would see at maybe in other cities, but they knew who Eli was, and they would come up and whether it's tip us all with like some beer or it's a family friend show, whatever. But yeah, I don't drink. But there was more than just like a cordial interaction. There was camaraderie there. So that's, I would say, food aside, one of the coolest things about being in Philly. What's something that makes me want to stay, as opposed to maybe in some ways it feels like it would be like selling my soul if I went to New York and just completely washed away any sort of like work-life balance that I think is essential, at least in my life. I think Philly provides that.
Very interesting. Hey, serving a fresh dish at a restaurant near you in Philadelphia, Dan Green, our guest picker here today. Obviously, we're a Penn State football show first and foremost, but the real point of this guest picker show is to bring to light the stories of folks that are working for great organizations or pursuing very interesting and fun passions, and you certainly qualify as that. So we're happy to have you here tonight, telling the story of Philadelphia, taking this otherwise, Central PA and Penn State-based crowd, and telling them a little bit about what's going on in Philadelphia. So appreciate that. And with that said, I think it's time to make some picks here today. So
Let's do it.
You did well last year. Not quite good enough to come up with the win, but
What did I do last year?
I think you were 4-2 last year.
That's not bad for someone that doesn't know anything.
That's exactly right.
I'm just kidding. I know more than what I look like, I'd say, right?
What does it look like?
I think I look like a semi-knowledgeable guy in sports.
Okay, and you're okay. So
and I'm saying I don't know much at all about
right.
college football, at least this year.
This year,
yeah.
Well, who knows anything this year? Would you have thought Penn State would have been 0-3? Neither would I.
I didn't answer your question. I already bet that they were going to go winless this year.
Well, we know what you're going to do when it comes to picking the Penn State game.
That's right.
All right. Well,
Anyway.
let's start in the Big Ten. Wisconsin is only 1-0. They've played one game and had multiple cancellations due to COVID.
Yeah.
Traveling to Michigan, struggling 1-2.
Well, I gotta say that I'm not a huge Michigan guy. Shout out to B. Mills, Brett Miller. Does anyone know him But he's.
I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, he's been a Michigan guy for his whole life, and I will never pick them to win. So I'm going Wisconsin on this one.
Okay.
Yeah. 30-27.
30-20. That ain't no guess.
Yeah,
That's what it's going to be.
You know the deal.
Wow.
Keep it moving.
That's quite a
Next.
score. How'd you come up with that guess?
Yeah.
Illinois traveling to Rutgers.
Oh, Gers. Easy. That's it. Rutgers.
Rutgers.
Always. I go with Rutgers 100% of the time.
Wow. So if Rutgers plays Michigan, I don't even need to ask.
Yeah.
You already know.
That's not the question.
All right. So Iowa is going to travel to Minnesota, and we're going to have you pick that game. I know there's another, tie friend.
With who?
Mr. Ray Sanders.
Oh.
Who may or may not be a guest picker next week, by the way, coming out of the healthcare side of
yeah?
things want to tell that story and have him pick Iowa
I could tell his story.
to beat Penn State, and that's not going to happen.
Yes, we'll see what happens. But
You can
that's
tell
cool.
a story?
I'd like to tell the story about Ray. Yeah, why not?
Go for it.
I'm here already.
Save him the trip.
Yeah. I got nothing.
So how about the pick then? Iowa, Minnesota.
Iowa.
All right, Iowa it is. South Carolina and the SEC. We're going to go to Ole Miss, keep it together, and pick that game.
Sorry. Ole Miss.
Ole Miss.
Yeah, Marshall Henderson.
Heck of a basketball player, man.
Yeah, he's doing a pretty bang up job in Belgium right now.
Yeah,
I watched a clip of him the other day.
there you go. Okay.
He's still a jack, but he's good.
He was a character. There's no doubt about
Yeah.
it. Last non-Penn State game. Indiana is taking on Michigan State. Indiana in the top 10 now, Dan. Crazy.
Okay.
What a world.
Yeah, I think I'll go Indiana on that one.
IU.
Yeah,
Okay.
they'll continue their road to the #1 team in the nation.
Then they play Ohio State next week.
Yeah,
So we'll have Ray pick that one.
exactly. I don't want to talk about Ray anymore.
We're done with that.
I'm done. Don't bring him up anymore, please.
All right. Last game. Penn State this week. Should be a very interesting game as they play Nebraska.
I've never been to Nebraska. Have you?
I have not yet. I would love to go there for the College World Series at some point.
Okay. Maybe we can do that together.
That would be fun.
That would be cool.
Little field trip.
Only if Penn State is in the College World Series, though.
Oh, well then we probably won't go.
I've been to a few games of Penn State
Baseball.
They're doing a pretty good job down there.
They are.
State College, right?
Yes, they are.
Mm-hmm. But that has nothing to do with this.
No.
So I'm going to take Penn State to lose this game and go 0-4 in the season.
Okay.
I went to Penn State, too, so
Yeah.
I know what I'm talking about.
Penn State a 4-point favorite. Dan picks Nebraska outright. And with that said, we're going to take you back to Bob Long, Tyler Gehlhaus. He'll come back to the studio in a second here, and we'll make our picks. But Dan, appreciate you coming on. It is always a pleasure, my friend.
You know it.
Yep. The energy has been brought. The picks have been made, and now we'll just see what happens.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again to Dan Green. Always an entertaining time with him, and thanks for his story as well as his picks. Well, to bring it back to the studio here, Tyler Gehlhaus and I are here to make our picks on those same games that Dan just picked. What do you got this week here, Tyler?
First, Wisconsin at Michigan. Actually, it's going to be one of the last games played, scheduled for Saturday night. Wisconsin, no Graham Mertz. 2 weeks, 3 weeks off, maybe already, it seems like, for the Badgers. I like Michigan in this one, just because Wisconsin doesn't have Graham Mertz, and they haven't played in a couple weeks. So, with that being said, even though Michigan hasn't looked that great this year, back-to-back losses, Michigan State and Indiana, I'm going to take the Wolverines here over Wisconsin.
Yeah, who the heck knows with this game, right? I mean, I'm sure Vegas has no idea either. Don't know what the spread is. Don't really
Plus
really
1.5, I think, Michigan. So
Wow.
Wisconsin's a little bit of an underdog.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
A little bit of a favorite.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'm going to take Wisconsin because as crazy as this season has been and as many games as they have not played, they're the team with something to play for. And Michigan, I think, is having some of the same conversations that Penn State fans are about have
Absolutely.
they given up and what's the future of that coaching staff and why haven't they been able to get some of the key recruits that they've been trying to get over the. I honestly think it's the same conversation in Ann Arbor. I'm going to take Wisconsin for that reason and that reason only.
Okay.
Something to play for.
Next, we have another Big Ten thriller, Illinois at Rutgers. Now, this week is a little bit Big Ten heavy. The slate isn't that strong. There's already been some games that have been postponed. So we're going to go with, interesting games, maybe not the most exciting, but should be pretty close. So Illinois at Rutgers. I'm going to take Rutgers here. Greg Schiano, really say no more after that. I mean, he is the face of the Rutgers football program. He was when he was there before. He was when he even wasn't there. They would always talk about Greg Schiano, and now he's back. And Rutgers doesn't look as bad as Rutgers usually does.
Yeah, agreed. I'm going to take Rutgers as well. I like Rutgers to win that game over Illinois, and they have not looked as bad this year, yes.
Like I said, sticking in the Big Ten, we have an interesting matchup. Indiana taking on Michigan State at Michigan State. I am going to take the Spartans here in an upset.
Look at you.
My reasoning is Indiana is coming off of another big win over Michigan. I don't know the last time they smelled this kind of success. Probably never, if I were to guess. Beating Penn State, Michigan, same season. Now you're going on the road to Michigan State. Obviously, no home field advantage. But next week, Indiana has Ohio State. So I think that they're going to be looking ahead a little bit and kind of feeling themselves after beating that Michigan team last week. And look at what Michigan State did a couple weeks ago to Michigan. I wouldn't be surprised if they do the same thing to Indiana. And I think Michigan State's going to beat Indiana straight up.
So I like all the cosmic forces that you're talking about, smelling yourself a little bit. Michigan State, a consummate underdog. I'm with you in every sense, except I don't think Michigan State's good enough to do this. So I'm sticking with the Hoosiers.
I did see Michigan State, the score against Iowa. But all things considered, it's college football. It's 2020.
Yeah.
That's why I'm taking the Spartans.
Good to have some different picks.
It is. And here we go, our last non-Penn State Big Ten pick. Iowa, just talked about, at Minnesota. I believe both teams are 1-2, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
I'm going to go, wow, this is actually pretty tough. I'm going to go Minnesota because of Tanner Morgan and Rashad Bateman. No other reason, certainly not their defense, but that's what I'm going with, and I'm sticking to it. Gophers.
Yeah, this was a toss-up for me. I think I'm going to take Iowa. The only issue I have with my picks here is I'm realizing how many road teams I'm picking.
No home field.
There you go. That's the only caveat to it, is maybe it doesn't matter. But I like Iowa. Again, I think they're a little bit better than Minnesota. I'm not calling Minnesota a flash in the pan last year. They do have a good quarterback and some good players on the offensive side of the football, some of which have moved on and some of which have opted out. But I think Iowa wins the game and shapes up an interesting matchup for Penn State the following weekend.
It certainly does. We're going to go to the SEC. I think we're going to agree on this one, and I think you're going to take the home team in this one. South Carolina travels to Oxford to take on Ole Miss Rebels. I am going Ole Miss. Talk about coaches getting fired. It's kind of Will Muschamp again this year. His name's coming up. 2-4. They had the last time they won was against Auburn, which was a good win for them, but not much since. And I think that Lane Kiffin is the better coach than Will Muschamp. Certainly, I like Ole Miss.
I like Ole Miss as well. I don't really understand it with Muschamp. That's another program. Like, what does South Carolina realistically expect to be on a given year? And I get the answer is not 2-4, but they did beat Georgia last year. That was a huge win for Will Muschamp and his guys. And seems like he and Gus Malzahn are perennially on a hot seat with programs that historically are not as good as the other programs in that division in that conference. But I'm taking Kiffin, and maybe it is an early dagger, if you will, for Will Muschamp here in 2020.
And finally, we have Penn State traveling to Nebraska, second road game of the year. 0-3 Penn State, 0-2 Nebraska. Nebraska had a game canceled against Wisconsin. It will not be made up because the Big Ten schedule did not have any room for error, really, when it came to rescheduling games. Penn State currently sits at -4, so they're a 4-point favorite. I don't know. I have no confidence. I don't know anything about Nebraska. We usually look into the other team a little bit more, but there's just so much going on within the Penn State program that it's not really necessary. I think Nebraska's gonna win. I don't know. I'll say 28-24 Nebraska.
I think you're going to have a cruddy defensive slog here, and I'm going to take Penn State to win the game 17-13.
Oh God! Yeah, 12.
That sounds nasty, doesn't it?
It does. And I just don't know how Penn State only holds them to 13. I know Nebraska's offense isn't that great, but just seeing what I mean, Indiana's offense struggled against Penn State. And
Yeah,
that's what's crazy.
A lot of that, though, was the offense giving Indiana the ball in really bad spots. It was
Right.
only the fourth
It
quarter
was.
when Indiana started moving the ball.
But that's what I'm saying is the Indiana offense struggled against the Penn State defense.
Right.
I mean, they really – and ever since, the Penn State defense has been nowhere to be found the last 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Granted, okay, Ohio State.
One's
I get
Ohio
that.
State, and the other is, you could argue, they gave up. I mean,
Right. And
so are they going to do that this week?
But then but you have an interesting point on your score because you go 17, and Penn State's offense hasn't looked anything special. I mean,
right.
Northwestern's putting up 40-something, Minnesota's putting up 40-something on Maryland, and Penn State puts up 25 or whatever it ended up being. So
in garbage
19.
time,
I'm
by
sorry,
the
it was
way.
19. Exactly. So I can't fault your score. I don't know what to expect. But you're right on that 4-point line there. I don't know what the over/under is. I'm guessing it's more than 30 points. But should be interesting noon if you're not doing anything. Tune into the game, I guess.
If you're tuning into us, you're probably tuning into the game.
But, just look for different things, body language, and really improvement for every position. So
Yep, should be fun. Well, hey, thanks, Tyler, for your time as always. Thanks to Dan Green for bringing the noise and the energy here on the guest picker segment. And thanks to you, the Penn State football fan, and those throughout the Small Player Big Play app and beyond who have been joining us and seeing what we have to say here on Penn State football. Not the way the season was expected to go, but the way it is going. And we're rolling with the punches here, bringing you the state of the program and joining you same time, same place next week. See you guys. Talk to you soon.